He took off his shirt, and the bar went silent. Scars, a massive tattoo. Then men started standing, saluting. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The Buffalo Grove Sports Bar had the feel of a place that had seen things: fights, proposals, breakups, even a funeral wake once, right at table 6. It wore its history in the cracked leather booths, the dusty beer signs from brands that no longer existed, and the way regulars didn't look up when the door creaked open. On this particular Saturday, the place pulsed with the low thunder of conversation, beer bottles clinking like metronomes in a chaotic symphony. Music droned from a jukebox that hadn't updated its playlist since the late 90s. And in the middle of all that sound, Hank Porter sat in silence. He was a weathered silhouette against the neon haze, bones wrapped in corded sinew, hands like sculpted bark gripping a steaming cup of coffee instead of a bottle like everyone else. His face was the kind that age had been unkind to, not out of cruelty, but wear. Sun-leathered skin, jaw tight from decades of discipline, eyes that had learned to see through smoke, both literal and metaphorical. His faded trucker hat bore the frayed ghost of a patch, long peeled away, once stitched there with meaning. His jacket, corduroy and weary, hung on him like a second skin, but it was the tattoo that pulled in the hyena-eyed college boys like blood in the water. It wrapped his forearm in blunt, unapologetic ink. An eagle, wings outstretched, clutching a lightning bolt. The lines were old, the kind done by hand or in a tent far from home, long before ink became art. There was no flair, no color, no clever shading, just black, just truth. Tyler saw none of that. He saw an old man trying to look tough and readied his ego like a gun. "Look at that," he said with a mocking curl to his lip. "Probably got that in a gas station bathroom." The table roared, loud enough that even the TVs seemed to flinch. Hank didn't. His eyes flicked upward for a heartbeat, then drifted back to the baseball game. Bottom of the 7th, bases loaded, 2 outs. The batter struck out swinging. Hank didn't even flinch. Denise, polishing a glass with practiced aggression, heard it all. Her jaw tightened. She didn't like these boys. Loud, soft-palmed, carrying arrogance like they'd earned it. She glanced at Hank, then back at them. "You might want to ease up, boys," she said evenly. "You don't know who you're talking about." But Tyler was already on his feet, all theater and no story. He sauntered over, that smug frat boy grin pasted on like a mask. "Hey, Gramps," he sneered. "That a prison tat or just a bad life choice?" Hank turned. Not quickly, not defensively, just turned. The look he gave Tyler wasn't hostile. It was quiet, like a man inspecting a loose nail. Calculated, unbothered, maybe even sad. "Both," Hank said, and turned away again. The words dropped like a brick in the room. Tyler chuckled, but it came out thin. Denise's hands had stopped moving. She watched Hank with a sharpness no one else noticed, because she'd seen that tattoo before, and she knew exactly what it meant. By the time the clock neared 9, the air inside the Buffalo Grove Sports Bar had thickened. The college kids had traded pitchers of beer for shots, and with each glass downed, their voices rose like steam. The buzz of easy jokes turned into stabs of performative mockery. Their laughter no longer searched for humor. It searched for dominance. Near the jukebox, one of them, a wiry kid in a Letterman jacket named Cody, threw his arm around a girl's shoulders and mimicked a limp, exaggerated shuffle. "I'm a real tough guy," he slurred, puffing out his chest and squinting with mock intensity. "Like old Hank the Ink. Cold-blooded killer right here, folks." The laughter that followed was sharp, brittle. But not everyone was smiling. From a corner booth in the shadows, Jeff Martin set down the half-eaten wing in his hand. He hadn't moved much all evening, hadn't raised his voice or even seemed to notice the growing tension. He had come here with his son, Brandon, for dinner after the boys' soccer game. A quiet night, wings, fries, and time with his kid. But now, his jaw tensed. Jeff stood. The motion was smooth, economical, the kind that belonged to someone who hadn't let himself grow soft with time. His gray t-shirt stretched across a chest that still bore the weight of discipline. His knuckles were scarred, not from bar fights, but from years on the obstacle courses of Fort Benning and places far darker. "Enough," he said. The word cut clean through the haze. The room stilled. The laughter stalled mid-breath. Cody blinked. "What's your problem, man?" Jeff didn't answer. He looked past the kid, locking eyes with Hank, who hadn't moved an inch at the bar. A pause lingered, a silent scan for something long buried. "Is it really you?" Jeff asked. Hank turned. Just his head, slow and deliberate. The two men held a long gaze. Recognition stirred, not just memory, but the kind of knowing that only came from surviving something together. Jeff took a step closer, voice hoarse. "3rd Infantry, Firebase Echo, Cambodia, 1970. And Hank stood. No fanfare, no bravado, just motion, stiff with age but not weakness. His jacket fell from his shoulders. Then, with the stillness of a man used to exposing truth, he pulled off his shirt. The bar gasped. Hank's chest bore the history of violence, the kind that couldn't be told in words. A thick scar cut diagonally from his ribs to his sternum, jagged like the edge of an exploded shell. Burn scars flared across his shoulder like a sunburst. Tattooed numbers and faded symbols clung to his skin like ghosts. But it was his back that drew every breath from the room, etched across it in old, faded ink, the full crest of the 3rd Infantry Division. Beneath it, the words carved into flesh and memory alike. "We were the first in. We never left anyone behind." Silence blanketed the bar. Brandon, still seated at the booth, rose without realizing he'd moved. "Dad," he whispered. "That's the unit you told me about." Jeff's voice trembled. "He's the reason I'm alive." And in that moment, Hank was no longer the old man with the coffee. He was history standing tall, unfolding, bone by bone, in front of a generation that had never been asked to carry weight like that. Silence gripped the room like a tightened fist. The kind of silence that didn't ask for reverence. It demanded it. Not with volume or violence, but with presence. The kind that weighed heavy on the chest and told even the most arrogant soul to keep still. Tyler's mouth had been half open, caught between a laugh and a stammer, but the sound had died before it found breath. His cheeks, flushed minutes ago with beer and bravado, had gone pale. There was no safe joke to deflect this moment. No clever line. Just the raw, unfiltered consequence of arrogance meeting something older, heavier, and sacred. Hank Porter stood bare-chested before them. Not as a warning, not as a statement, but as a living monument. His eyes swept the room, not with judgment, but with quiet gravity. They were eyes that had watched men breathe their last in the dirt. Eyes that had memorized the flicker of helicopter blades as they disappeared over treetops, carrying the wounded and the dead. He wasn't just in the bar. For that moment, Hank was the bar. Its foundation, its soul, the reason its walls hadn't collapsed under years of spilled beer and shouted regrets. He lifted his arm, tapping the eagle on his forearm with a fingertip worn by time. "I got this," he said, voice low but firm. "When my best friend died beside me. He had the same one. We got it together the night before we shipped out." There was no tremor in his voice, no dramatics. It wasn't a story he told often, but when he did, It came out as it had always lived inside him, clean, sharp, and full of ghosts. Denise stepped forward from behind the bar. She didn't say much, just set a shot glass of bourbon down in front of him, the amber liquid catching the light. "On the house," she said softly, her eyes glistening but steady. Then came the movement, slow, reverent. A trucker by the pool table reached into his vest, revealing a silver Ranger pin dulled by time. He held it like a relic. A man near the dartboard, hair silver and thin, pushed up his sleeve. There, inked in greenish blue, the Marine Corps bulldog still growled across his bicep. A woman, retired nurse, eyes heavy with memory, crossed the room and placed her hand on Hank's shoulder. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She had seen enough blood to know which scars were earned and which were worn like costumes. And then Jeff, steady and proud, lifted his hand to his brow and saluted. The others followed, one by one. No orders, no signals. Just the old code, alive and breathing in the still air. They didn't salute the ink. They saluted the weight beneath it, the memories, the loss, the endurance. Because in that moment, Hank Porter wasn't a man to laugh at. He was the reason men like them still stood. Tyler approached the bar like a man walking barefoot across broken glass, every step full of regret, every breath catching on shame. The brashness that had lit his face earlier was gone, replaced by something far more sobering. His cheeks were red, not from beer this time, but from the kind of heat that comes when a boy realizes he's been playing a man's game without knowing the rules. He stopped a foot away from Hank, eyes lowered, voice barely more than a whisper. "Sir, I didn't know. Hank looked up, steady and still. His face was unreadable, carved from stone and storm, but his eyes held a strange gentleness. "You don't have to call me sir," he said quietly. "I was just a corporal." The distinction mattered to him, not because he was modest, but because titles never meant much in the mud. What mattered was who ran into the fire and who didn't. Tyler's lips parted, trembling slightly. "But I'm sorry." Hank didn't make a show of forgiving him. He didn't reach out, didn't smile to ease the boy's discomfort. He simply nodded once, slowly. "Just remember," he said, tapping his forearm once more, "you never know what someone's carrying under their shirt." With that, he turned. No fanfare, no farewell. He slipped his arms back into his jacket, took one last look at the bar, and then walked toward the door. The weight of every step seemed to echo, not in sound, but in memory. When the door opened, the cold night air swept in behind him, brushing past those still seated, and by the time it clicked shut, Hank was already fading into the dark, a ghost wrapped in denim and dust. No one spoke. The TVs still played. The ice in glasses still clinked. But everything felt different now, like something sacred had just passed through them, leaving behind the unmistakable trace of something larger than any of them could fully grasp. At the booth, Jeff's son finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you ever talk about guys like him before?" Jeff's answer came after a breath that felt too heavy for just air. "Because sometimes," he said, voice thick, "the bravest men are the quietest, and sometimes the loudest ones." He looked toward Tyler, who was still standing where Hank had left him, "are just waiting to grow up." No applause followed. No toast was made. But in the months that came after, everyone who had been there told the story the same way. Not about the tattoo, but about the silence, and the old man who carried more under his shirt than most men could ever hold in their hearts.